Hey, what is going on guys, RvzStealth here, and in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the new strong and weak picks for what looks to be one of the biggest patches so far in Season 9. Alright, so to start off here, the Scuttle Crab changes for this patch, it's now going to be spawning at 3:15 instead of 2 minutes. Now this is going to indirectly buff and nerf quite a few different champions. It's going to benefit champions who have a much better level 3 than a level 2, so one jungler I think is really going to get buffed by this change is Elise, because Elise's level 2 skirmish is not very good at all. She can't really contest Scuttle Crab at level 2, but once she does hit level 3, her all-in potential or her dueling potential with her cocoon, if she can hit that, is really good. So look out for Elise in this patch for sure. Also some other junglers that just do benefit a lot more from farming in the jungle and they don't want to be fighting, so like any tank jungler that doesn't want to be interacting as much in the early game is going to get buffed by these changes. And then this should also be a slight indirect buff to champions that can't really get lane priority in the early game, so champions that don't have very good wave clear in the first few levels should get buffed by this change as well. For Tahm getting a ton of different changes for this patch, probably the champion getting buffed the most for 9.9, so really nice base stat changes, health being increased by a lot there, move speed also being increased, so really good changes there to Tahm. Passive is getting buffed in the early game, nerfed in the late game, so more of a buff here, especially if you're playing solo lane Kench. So if you're playing top lane Kench, I do think that this change here does help him out for 9.9. Q changes, slow duration being increased, the cooldown is being increased though in the earlier ranks, so a little bit of a hit there, but I think overall these should be net buffs to Tahm Q because his missile range is being increased, the slow is being increased by 20% in the early ranks, so it just allows him to stick onto his opponent really well for next patch. Really interesting changes to his W for next patch. You're not going to be slowed by 95% when you eat an opponent or your teammate, and I just feel like this really reduces Tahm's viability in the duo lane. If you're trying to eat your teammate, trying to bring them to safety, and you're being slowed by 95%, you're not really going to be able to bring them to safety, so I feel like in a lot of different situations, this is going to be a big nerf to Tahm's W for 9.9. He's also getting some more changes though to where the cooldown's being decreased, the damage is being changed a little bit there, but I feel like that 95% slow is really going to hurt him for next patch. E is getting buffed for next patch, his ultimate's getting nerfed, so I just think that overall these changes do more so help Tahm in the solo lane for next patch, and this W change here I feel like is going to really hurt him in the duo lane. For Hecarim for next patch, a couple of nerfs here, so Q damage boost is being lowered from 10% down to 5%, E minimum and E maximum damage are also being lowered more so at the later ranks, so these nerfs don't seem like the end of the world for Hecarim. However, I do think they might be enough to drop him down into A tier. I think right now in this patch, Hecarim's definitely one of the strongest, if not the strongest junglers, so I'm hesitant to say he's going to drop down into A tier, but I think at the very most, that's as far as he'd drop. He's still going to be a very solid jungler for 9.9. And then for Jarvan, kind of similar in the sense that because I think Jarvan is like on the edge right now of S and A tier, they could be enough to drop him down, but W bonus shield here is being changed, so it's getting decreased there. E cooldown is being increased by 1 second, so they don't seem like the biggest changes to Jarvan, and like the Hecarim changes, still going to be a great solo queue pick for 9.9. And then another S tier jungler getting a couple of nerfs that probably won't drop her out of S tier is Reksai. So Q cooldown is being increased, E damage is being lowered, and when you take a look at the numbers there, they're not that bad. Like damage is only being lowered there by 5. Cooldown, I say the cooldown nerf is the bigger one there, being increased by 3 seconds once you max it out, but are they going to be enough to drop Reksai down into A tier? Possibly, but like I said for Jarvan and for Hecarim, still going to be a great jungle pick for 9.9. And then for Aatrox for next patch, I'm not going to be giving him a ranking as to where I think he's going to place next patch, because with his ultimate basically getting reworked, I feel like it's really hard to judge where he's going to land for 9.9. His ultimate is getting a lot more, stats added onto it, so more move speed, more attack damage when you use it, but you're now only going to get the revive when you do kill an opponent, so it's going to be interesting to see how this does affect Aatrox for next patch, and I'm just not too sure where it's going to land him on the tier list, so I'm not rating him here for 9.9 yet. For Blitz for next patch, passive shield strength is being changed from 50% of current to 30% of max, which I think in most situations should be a buff to Blitz's passive. His ultimate passive, for some reason I don't have our passive on screen there, but it's his ultimate's passive that is now gonna deal damage on auto attacks instead of just doing a random lightning bolt that's gonna hit a minion and not do any damage for you. So this is gonna be a really nice change to Blitz. It means his level 6 all-in is gonna get even stronger here for 9.9. So overall, really good changes to Blitz for next patch. So 2 Ekko buffs for 9.9 here, base AD being increased by 3, so this does help Ekko out more than you'd think because he is a Shen user, so any base AD increase is going to increase the damage of Shen there by a substantial amount. Mana cost is being lowered, which doesn't really matter too much. It's only being lowered more so at the later ranks, and at that point in the game, Ekko isn't so much mana hungry. I'd say for the first couple of levels, Ekko does struggle a lot more with mana, but because they're not decreasing it really until you do get to the later ranks, I don't think that one matters too much, and Ekko should just stay an A tier pick for 9.9. So for Darius for 9.9, his Q's damage is being increased there by 10 at all ranks. His Q's heal is also being increased, so I think Darius is going to move up into S tier for 9.9. We're seeing a lot of different tank buffs, or we will go into more of the tank buffs later on in the video, but tanks are slowly starting to come back into the meta right now, and I think that Darius is already a pretty good pick in 9.9, so if we start seeing more tanks even as well being played in the top lane, it's going to make Darius even stronger. So with the buffs he's getting here, I do think he's going to be an S tier pick for next patch. And then pretty interesting changes to Voli for next patch. So W bonus attack speed per stack is being increased by 5%. Now you can get 3 stacks of your W. So technically, if you get those 3 stacks, this is a 15% bonus attack speed increase there. And this should really help out Volibear's dueling potential, especially in the early game. I think that with the Scuttle changes as well, and with level 2 Scuttle not being a thing anymore, I think this does favor Volibear even more because he is more so a lot stronger at level 3. And I think that if the meta does slow down a little bit in the jungle, it is going to favor Volibear a little bit. So overall, I think Volibear is going to be a solid A tier pick. For the lower elos, he might actually jump up into an S tier pick for 9.9. One buff to Sylas for next patch, so W base damage being increased there, and on screen I do have him moving from B to A tier, but honestly when I take a look at these changes again, I honestly don't think it's even going to bump him out of B tier. It might bump him out of B tier into A tier, but Sylas is just a pretty bad pick in this patch right now. He's been nerfed a ton with the Aftershock changes coming through in this patch as well. That should hurt Sylas even more, so I think that overall he's going to stay a below average pick for 9.9. Lots of different changes to Soraka for next patch, so Q it looks like is getting an overall nerf for this patch. Cooldowns being increased in the early ranks, damage is being decreased, the heal from it is being increased, so increases her survivability a little bit in the laning phase, but I would say that overall this is a net nerf to Soraka's Q. Her E is also being changed to where the cooldown is being decreased, however the damage is also being decreased, so I just think that these changes here with the Q damage decrease, with the E damage decrease, they should hurt Soraka for next patch more so than the buffs will help her. 2 small buffs to Shen for 9.9, so attack speed per level being increased by 1, E bonus health is damage being increased by 3%, so not going to be enough to jump him up to S tier or anything. I think Shen's just going to stay an A tier pick for this patch. So Kennen getting a small nerf for this patch. E's no longer going to grant him armor and magic resist. However, when you use your ultimate, that's now going to give you the armor and magic resist. So because your ultimate only lasts for 3 seconds, it's on a much longer cooldown than your E. This should be a net nerf to Kennen for next patch, and it is going to make him a little bit more exploitable now in the laning phase because he doesn't get those extra resists when he does use his E. For Lissandra for this patch, W base damage and W AP ratio are both being increased actually by a pretty decent amount, but I just don't feel like it's going to be enough to really move Lissandra for next patch. She needs to get some power back into her Q in my opinion, because the cooldown nerf to her Q a few patches ago just really hurt her a lot. And then also in this patch, Aftershock is getting nerfed too, so with that nerf, I think it's going to like cancel out this buff in a way. So in my opinion, she's just going to stay a B tier pick for 9.9. So Maokai is getting a buff for this patch, Q damage being increased there by 25 once you max it out, and you do max this ability out first, so pretty good buff here to Maokai for next patch. I don't think it's going to be enough to jump him up into S tier in my opinion for this patch. It might, but I do think Maokai is definitely going to be one of the premier tanks in the top lane for this patch. For Akali for next patch here, she's going to be staying down in the gutter, down in the B tier at least for this patch here. Don't really understand why she's getting nerfed when she's sitting at a 45% win rate. I feel like this is more so probably of a high elo or competitive nerf than it is for just a average solo queue nerf. But why is Akali getting nerfed, but a 54% win rate champion in Riven still has yet to get nerfed? Just doesn't make a ton of sense to me. But nevertheless, W extended duration is being lowered, W cooldown also being increased there, so actually a pretty big hit to Akali's W for this patch. And then Rakan for this patch, actually some pretty solid buffs for 9.9. So base HP being increased by 60, base armor up there by 3, base AD is being decreased, so it takes a little bit of hit there in damage for some more survivability. Base MR being lower, and then MR growth is being increased. His W dash speed is going back up to actually a decent amount, so it's being increased there, it looks like by 350. And then his ultimate now, Rakan is going to have a 0.5 second cast time where he can no longer use his W or flash when he does use his ultimate, so this is pretty interesting here. I think that overall with these changes, it is going to be a net buff for Rakan for next patch, and he's going to jump up into A tier, but it's going to be interesting to see how these ultimate changes do affect Rakan's interaction there with his engage for 9.9. So Morgana is going to be a bit more punishable now in the laning phase for 9.9. Shield strength is being lowered and cooldown is also being increased. So I think that overall pretty solid nerfs to Morgana for this patch. I do think that if you're playing an aggressive support into Morgana, this does give you a little bit more time to play with in the laning phase with that cooldown increase. Also, if you're playing a champion who is like an AP champion and you can break that shield pretty easily with your magic damage, then this is also going to help you out for next patch. So I do think Morgana is probably going to drop down into A tier with these changes for 9.9. And then one item getting buffed for next patch, Manamune AD is being increased by 10, so a pretty substantial buff there to Manamune, and this is going to buff Ezreal. Not a ton of other champions are running this item right now. I'm pretty sure actually no other champion than Ezreal builds this item right now. It could possibly come back on Jace situationally because he did run this previously, but I feel like only Ezreal is probably going to get buffed by this change for 9.9. Magical Footwear is getting a nerf to where the free boots is going to take 2 minutes longer to come online. Now, when you get a takedown, the timer is going to be reduced by 45 seconds now instead of 30. So a little bit of a buff there to compensate, but overall this is going to be a nerf to Magical Footwear. And I think that you're going to have just a lot more secondary options now for your runes for 9.9. Most champions were taking free boots as their secondary runes for 9.8. So I just think this does give you a lot more choice now, and it's a lot more versatility in that secondary tree for this patch. For Aftershock for this patch, it is going to be a little bit of a buff, a little bit of a nerf depending on which champion you're taking it on. So if you're taking it on a champion who's not building a lot of health and who's not going to be building tanky, then it is going to be a nerf for this patch. So damage is being changed. It's no longer going to scale off your base AD or AP. It's just going to scale off of your max health now, and that is being increased by 1%. Armor and MR, it is being changed from 70 to 120 scaling to 70 plus 50% of your bonus resist. So if you are building tanky, if you're building armor, if you're building magic resist, this is going to be a nice change for next patch. But if you're playing a champion like Galio, for example, or Lissandra, who's not going to be building any bonus resist, this is going to hurt them for 9.9. Some more tank buffs for 9.9. Bone plating, the damage absorbed is being increased, so it's going to be another buff there to champions like the Maokai, the Scion, the Mundo. These tank picks who are already pretty good right now in 9.8 will be getting stronger here in 9.9. Conditioning is also getting buffed for this patch. Now, it is in the same row as bone plating, so it's not like you can take both of them and you're going to benefit from both of the buffs for this patch, but it's still a buff to a bunch of different champions who do like to take this. Junglers, tank junglers do usually like to take conditioning, so armor and MR is being increased there by 1, so small buff to tank junglers, small buff to some tank top laners for 9.9. For Celerity for next patch, the move speed bonus when you do use like a move speed ability is being decreased from 10% increase down to 7% increase. It's now going to have a 1% flat move speed on it, but it's overall going to be a net nerf, and I think this is more so going to affect champions like Hecarim. And a lot of jungler champions who do run Celerity secondary are going to get slightly nerfed by these changes, but I think that with this change here to Celerity and with also the direct nerfs to Hecarim, I do think he does have the potential to drop down to A tier for this patch. Some buffs to Scorch for this patch, so bonus magic damage is being increased there, and I think that right now in this patch, Gathering Storm is slightly outclassing Scorch, so I do think that Scorch is now going to be able to contest with Gathering Storm for 9.9, and I do think that you're going to have to decide based on team cons, based on the champion you're playing, whether you want to take Scorch or Gathering Storm for 9.9. And then a bunch of different buffs to the domination tree, so Cheap Shot is getting buffed, true damage there is being increased, so it is a small buff here to non-gap close domination users. So I think gap close users in the domination tree are still going to take the sudden impact, but if you're playing someone say like an Olaf or a Skarner who do run the Predator, this is going to be a slight buff to them for 9.9. And then for Ghost Poro for this patch is now also going to grant you a stack when it spots an enemy, so I do think it's now going to be able to contest with Eyeball Collector. I do think that especially if you're playing a mid lane champion who you don't think is going to have a ton of kill pressure in the early game, then I do think this is going to be the better choice now over Eyeball Collector, because if you're not able to get your kills in the early game, if you're not able to snowball, then the Ghost Poro here is definitely going to outclass Eyeball for 9.9. And then a slight buff here to Relentless Hunter for this patch, so Domination junglers who do run Domination Primary will get buffed by these changes for 9.9, so move speed there increased by 2, move speed per stack increased by 1. And then a small change here to Ultimate Hunter, CDR per stack is being increased by 1%, so small buff here to champions like Kennen, Fizz, Rumble. Is it going to outclass Ravenous Hunter though for next patch? It's hard to tell. I think Ravenous Hunter's probably still going to outclass Ultimate Hunter despite these buffs for 9.9. So that is going to be all for this video, guys. If you did enjoy, then be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you have yet to already. So thanks for watching, have an awesome day, and I'll see you in my next video.